CyberSaftey is often defined by the dangers that it helps prevent. Cyberstalking, online grooming and sexual solicitation, cyberviolence and cyberbullying are a few of the major issues that can impact adolescent students in your classroom. Cyberstalking, as defined in a 2017 study published by researchers Dillon and Smith, refers to a wide range of behaviours that act as invasions of one's personal privacy, repeated events of unwanted attention, and evidence of feeling threatened or fearful of one's stalker occurring in the online sphere. Please, cyberstalking is electronic stalking and shares many of the same qualities and effects of traditional stalking. However, Goodnow in 2007 reported that cyberstalking is in fact more dangerous than regular stalking, as it affords the perpetrator anonymity, can occur in an instant, and allows the stalker to easily impersonate the victim. Now, it may seem easy to disqualify the threat of cyberstalking as something too rare to concern ourselves with, and this may be in part due to the lack of incidence and prevalence of data pertaining to cyberstalking in Australia, with exact estimates remaining unknown, according to Dooley and colleagues' review of cybersafety research. However, the same paper estimates that data collected from US, UK, and Australian studies can provide us with an estimate of 7% of people falling victim to this kind of stalking. It should also be noted that studies examining legal issues surrounding cyberstalking have found that preventing cyberstalking from a legal point of view can be exceptionally difficult, given the lack of operationalized legal definitions of the term and the gaps between state and federal understandings of, and actions against the crime. Cyberstalking in and of itself can have severe impact on victims, particularly young ones. However, it is also closely linked to the advent of online grooming and sexual solicitation. Grooming can be described as a set of behaviours enacted by a suspected pedophile in order to secure a meeting with a child for unlawful purposes. Anonymity, the prospect of grooming multiple children simultaneously, and the capacity to generate materials online themselves are a few of the reasons Dooley and colleagues report that potential child groomers may seek to utilise the internet in their endeavours. Sexual solicitation, in this context, is described as asking a child to talk about or participate in sexual behaviours when they do not want to, as well as sexual proposals linked to online relationships with children. In a 2007 study conducted by Mitchell and colleagues, it was found that adolescents who fall victim to online sexual solicitation are around 3 times more likely to report symptoms of major depressive disorder, while a further study conducted by Mitchell and Wybara in 2008 describes online predators not as obvious lurking figures on online forums, but as much more difficult to distinguish threats, making it difficult for individuals, particularly adolescents, to identify them as dangerous. Research by Wallach and colleagues, conducted in 2004, again discredits the stereotype that online child sex offenders use overt methods of trickery to disguise themselves as children with non-sexual motives, finding in their sample that only 5% of predators pretended to be adolescents, and most victims were aware that their meeting with this individual was to be sexual in nature. From this, we can gain some insight into how complex this issue is and how difficult it can be to prevent. The first step to prevention is determining some of the characteristics that victims of these crimes tend to share. Dooley and colleagues in their review cite online interactions with strangers, particularly individuals who frequently use chat rooms, history of sexual abuse, general patterns of risky behaviour, and homosexuality or questioning one's sexuality as all being associated with greater risk of falling victim to grooming and sexual solicitation. However, the highest risk group is females aged 14 to 17. Also of interest are the findings drawn by Finklaw and colleagues in 2000, which indicated that the vast majority of online sexual solicitation offenders were in fact other adolescents and to a lesser extent young adults aged 18 to 21. This means that the issue of sexual solicitation is not only one we must protect our students from, but also prevent our students from engaging in. Cyberbullying refers to an act of aggression intended to harm others through repeated, deliberate, and hostile behaviours like offline bullying, with the important caveat that online avenues are used to achieve this outcome. It should be mentioned that cyberbullying, according to research by Thomas and colleagues, has been shown in Australia to be less prevalent than traditional forms of bullying, representing roughly a quarter of all bullying incidents, while traditional bullying represents almost 3/4. These findings were later corroborated by Jadamba and colleagues with regard to both perpetration and victimisation. Moreover, in a study conducted by Przyslipski and Bowes in 2017, they found in a sample of English students that cyberbullying accounted for only 0.1% of variability in mental health and well-being, while traditional bullying accounted for 5% of this variation. These results would indicate that cyberbullying does not seem to reflect a pressing issue in the educational community. However, a recent ABS survey showed that between 2016 and 2017, 5% of children aged 5 to 14 had experienced cyberbullying, whilst Kowalski and colleagues noted in their 2014 meta-analysis of cyberbullying that conceptualizations of specific cyberbullying behaviours have led to inconsistencies in reported prevalence rates. Kowalski and colleagues cite some similarities between the adverse roles the internet can have to shape the concept of bullying with the concept of stalking. In the anonymity and accessibility of victims has the power to exacerbate the incidence and power of the bullying. Interestingly, Dooley and colleagues state the anonymity as a concept is important despite 82% of victims knowing the identity of the perpetrator. This meta-analysis found also that cyber victimization and traditional bullying are the greatest predictors of cyberbullying, suggesting that much of cyberbullying could be reactive, and there is a strong relationship between traditional bullying and cyberbullying, with one potentially causing the other. Furthermore, Finkelhor and colleagues report that up to 2/3 of incidences of cyberbullying are linked to offline bullying episodes. Other studies have suggested that cyberbullying is linked to anxiety, depression, substance use, sleep deprivation, poor learning outcomes, absenteeism, dropping out of school, and even murder or suicide. The last major aspect of cybersafety is preventing exposure to inappropriate and illicit content. There is an array of materials accessible on the internet that could be considered inappropriate or illicit. However, it appears that both the empirical literature and parents of students seem most concerned with pornography. Flood, in 2007, wrote that of 16 and 17-year-olds, 3/4 of males and 1/4 of females have viewed an X-rated movie, while a recent Australian Bureau of Statistics survey found that 14% of children aged 5 to 14 had been exposed to inappropriate material on the internet. A great deal of these encounters are said to be accidental, and this proportion is said to be on the rise. It should be noted, however, that data was collected through self-report measures and could be subject to some bias. Flood, in a later paper, determined that concerns around these kinds of encounters are not in vain, and that these materials have the potential to disturb or upset younger children and instill unhealthy sexual habits and attitudes in older adolescents. In this paper, Flood discusses the complex relationship between minors and sexually explicit content, suggesting the characteristics of the viewer, their own engagement with the material, and the context of the exposure are all implicated in the resulting effect of the experience. A US survey stated that 10% of minors aged 10 to 17 who accidentally had been exposed to pornography described themselves as very or extremely upset by it. And an Australian survey showed in a sample of similarly aged students that 53% of young people had encountered something on the internet that they deemed offensive or disgusting, with pornography being the main perpetrator of producing these views. Young adolescents and females appear to experience the most distress in these encounters, according to Sabina and colleagues. Moreover, minors that accidentally or intentionally access pornography are influenced by 3 factors. 1. The pornography is free and easily accessible. 2. Explicit material is often present on the front page of explicit websites. And 3. Pornography tends to be coercive, using pop-up ads and spam emails to encourage people to revisit their sites. As for slightly older users of pornography, particularly males, Malamuth and colleagues found in 2000 that males who frequently access pornography, particularly violent pornography, tend to hold attitudes that are more supportive of sexual violence and sexual aggression. From this, it has been theorized that consumption of pornography could also increase the incidence of sexual activity, escalating the view that masculinity should be reinforced through sexual achievement. Given the immense complexity underpinning each of the aforementioned issues, it may seem nearly impossible to protect our students from the harms of the internet. Although it may be impossible to remedy all students' actions online, there may be some actions a teacher can take to better protect their students. Measures cited in the academic literature that can be taken to improve cyber safety fall into two distinct categories: filtering and education. Filters, which you may already be familiar with, are forms of software that can be installed onto computers that can filter sexually explicit or graphic images, monitor online activities, limit the amount of time spent online, or block personal information from being posted or emailed. Most schools will have a web monitoring program that prevents students from accessing illicit or graphic content at school. However, Dooley and colleagues found in their 2009 study that only 20 to 35% of households in Australia use internet filters, with little data existing about current usage rates. Parents trusting their children, expensiveness, and questions of effectiveness have all been reported as reasons parents give for not installing filters in their home. Pownell and Bailey in 1999 claimed that we should be guiding students and trusting them more with the internet rather than putting up barriers. There is extensive quantities of literature that support this view. With this considered, it is important that teachers maintain strong home-school relationships. It is important that we as teachers work with families to produce safer online environments for students both in and out of the classroom, especially considering the likelihood that risky online behaviours are performed almost entirely outside of school. Some non-technical strategies employed by parents can include time restrictions, supervision and control, home education about internet safety, and rules pertaining to which sites they visit and what information they post on the web. Educational strategies involved in developing online safety as of 2020 are plentiful. However, there are questions pertaining to the degree to which these strategies are evidence-based. Finklaw and colleagues in a recent publication suggested that dynamics formally discussed in the academic research are not reflected in the messages emphasized in current popular educational programs. This same paper suggests that implementing cyber safety into already established evidence-based programs that address their offline counterparts to cyber stalking and cyberbullying may be most effective. This is due to the strong co-occurrences present between similar online and offline harms. This article also examines the effectiveness of an array of educational programs and reports on their effectiveness. Educational models that draw on establishing norms of what is hurtful, teaching empathy, teaching de-escalation strategies, help-seeking, and teaching bystander support have been shown to be most effective against cyberbullying. Pertaining to cyber stalking, grooming, and sexual solicitation, Veli, a member of the Turkish National Police, in a 2016 peer-reviewed report, suggests that one of the most important factors for combating these events is raising awareness and working towards creating greater online privacy for students at legislative, school, and parental levels. This said, there is very little information pertaining to specific evidence-based programs for specifically preventing cyber stalking and exposure to inappropriate material, making filtering and monitoring methods more effective for these issues. Specific security measures including teaching your child good password management, the importance of logging out, setting social media accounts to private, and not tagging locations are also listed. All of this may seem a little overwhelming. However, I have developed a checklist of actions you can take as a teacher to identify and improve cyber safety for your students in accordance with evidence-based materials. Here I presented a reference list so that you might further extend your knowledge on the topic and use it to improve your teaching practice in the future.